Just starting. It's saying it's preparing.
Okay.
So I'll wait for about 30 seconds and then
if you want to keep an eye on my camera, I'll just give you a thumbs up. Right, yes, we're live.
At the moment, it's only showing my screen, which is slightly. There we go. Okay, we are live.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nabil. I work with the UK Community Network, and we're delighted to be hosting this talk jointly with Helping Dawlish and Dawlish Beach Cams. So the UK Community Network was founded by my colleague Marina back in March last year to provide help and support for people who are sort of at their most vulnerable during the COVID pandemic. And part of that work involves us supporting local groups and charities and community organizations all across the country. And we were really delighted to be able to help Helping Dawlish over the winter period with a consignment of PPE, which went towards supporting their Christmas Hugs in a Bag campaign, and then also the support they're giving for the vaccination rollout in Dawlish. So we were so pleased to see that. Going forward, something really interesting we're planning on the 23rd of March is something we're calling the UK Community Day, where we're bringing community groups from across the country together to celebrate some of the amazing work volunteers are doing all around the country. And we were so pleased that Helping Dawlish put forward somebody to be their community hero, someone who's really gone above and beyond to support their community during these difficult times. And so congratulations to Debbie Williams for being nominated for that. I'm now going to pass over to Neil from Dawlish Beach Cams to talk a little bit more about what they're doing in Dawlish, and then we'll get into the event. Neil. Thank
you, Nabil. Yes, so Helping Dawlish was started at the first lockdown, and it is a joint of 13 organisations working together to help people during the pandemic. Hang on, can you see me all right? And so yes, they've been out helping, providing food for people. For example, this weekend they will be delivering over 100 hot fish suppers to people that need feeding. They've been befriending, and there's been volunteers shopping, collecting prescriptions for people, and also delivering 100 Christmas hugs in a bag, which has been a nice little hamper that have made people feel not so lonely at Christmas. So you can go to helpingdawlish.co.uk and you can donate there, and everything you give helps. You know, we've still got quite a way till we're out of this lockdown, and people still need help. Again, if you're in Dawlish and you would like help yourself, please, all the information is available on the website. And obviously, I run Dawlish Beach Cams. We've been out today live streaming the Wave Walker, which has been an incredible machine that's been here. And David Force, a friend of mine, who I'm actually in his old office, actually. This was his office many years ago. And he was also, like myself, chairman of Chamber of Trade once. So I shall put him on. He's going to do a brilliant talk about Brunel and the railway. Don't forget, we have his books available on our website, and every Sunday at the minute he's doing a guest blog post for us that is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So I'm going to hand it over to David now, and he shall do your talk. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Neil. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here in dear old Dawlish, and it's very nice to be here. A little bit nerve-wracking. I've not done anything quite like this. I did check the TV schedules. I'm up against Emmerdale at the moment, followed by Coronation Street. But bear with us. I think this will be a little bit more exciting for you. I hope so anyway. So going straight into the talk, and the history of Dawlish does go back probably 1,500 years or even 3,000 years if we look at the Dawlish Hoard, which has recently turned up here, which you can Google and find out lots more about, but I'm not here to talk about that. But for much of its history, and if I say 1,500 years Anglo-Saxon times, for 1,300 years of that 1,500 years, Dawlish was quite a small, insignificant village, which was quite isolated from the rest of Devon. And if you look at Exeter as being as far west really as the Romans came and stayed for any length of time, Dawlish was very hidden by hills. You've got the sea one side, you've got the Holden Hills the other side, and we're sort of nestled in a bowl here. And it was very sheltered, quite inaccessible. And if you look at Kenton, sort of midway between Dawlish and Exeter, that was a much more important village back in the day, because it was the seat of the Powdram, or the Earls of Devon, and that much closer to Exeter for trade and all sorts of other things. So Dawlish remained very much a small, insignificant village up until the late 1700s. And we're talking at the time of George III, who was on the throne at the time, before he had gone completely mad. And he had this idea that the seaside was very restorative for invalids, or for those who weren't well. Then seawater, or living beside the sea, visiting the seaside, bathing in the seawater, breathing in the sea air, even drinking the seawater, was actually very good for the soul. So he recommended, and of course Brighton and Eastbourne and Bournemouth, places like that, became seaside resorts long before Dawlish did. But Dawlish, having such a long beach and being down in dear old Devon, became popular towards the end of the 18th century. At that time, we were at war with the French and the Spanish, which we have been for centuries, really, on and off, probably a little bit like that nowadays, I should think. But anyway, going back to the late 1700s, we had the Napoleonic Wars, which were preventing people visiting Europe. The young families did the grand tour of Europe, and they weren't able to do that so much towards the end of the 18th century, because we were at war. So therefore, to resort to different places to get a break, they came to the seaside, and Dawlish was one of the places they discovered. So from 1780s, that was when the first of the bigger houses was built in the area. And up until that time, Dawlish was a village of two halves, really. There was Dawlish Ford, which was the main part of the village up round the parish church, St Gregory's, and Dawlish Strand, which was that part down by the seaside. And not the Strand as we know it, although there was housing there, or cottages there, but the Strand was the marine parade area. It was the right beside the seaside, and the Strand as we know it, with the shops, only became the Strand in the middle of the 19th century. So in the late 1700s, not very much was happening in Dawlish. It was, as I say, quite insignificant. Lowly cottages, very much agricultural and fishing based. People lived hand to mouth, or big families, but even so, in the late 1700s, there were only just over 1,000 people living here. So it was very much village size, about 1,400 people. And as I say, it was isolated, so people didn't come and go. There was no stagecoach at that time. There was no Exeter Road out towards Exeter up that way. The only way in and out of Dawlish was either up Oak Hill and up Luscombe Hill, and thence over the hill to Chudley, which is where the Exeter to Plymouth stagecoach route was. And if you wanted to travel anywhere, any long distances from Dawlish, that was the way to go. You got horse and cart over to Chudley, then you took the stagecoach up or down. And the only other way, if you wanted to get in, was up over Stockton Hill or Strand Hill, a little bit inland to get onto the road to Exeter beyond Shudderton, because Shudderton itself was quite marshy. There was quite a tidal inlet as well. For not a very hospitable place, really, Dawlish. But towards the end of the 18th century, things started to change. More and more people wanted to visit, and they could only visit really by getting stagecoach to Exeter, and thence private coach or private horse and cart down to the village. But the three very influential gentlemen started to look at Dawlish and think that there was a way forward. Firstly, there was John Eady Manning, who we'll talk a little bit about. Secondly, there was Charles Hall, who built Luscombe Castle here in the early 1800s, and then thirdly was Brunel, who came a little bit later, but is obviously the basis of the talk. But I'd like to sort of give a bit of an introduction as to how the others played their part. I suppose John Eady Manning is the gentleman to start with, because in the early 1800s he had the opportunity to buy the manor of Dawlish. For 700 years or so, Dawlish had actually been owned, or the manor of Dawlish had been owned by the cathedral in Exeter. St Peter's Cathedral had owned the whole manor, and that's, I think it was over 8,000 acres really. It went from East Teignmouth right up to Cockwood Sod, and then up to Little Holden as well. So it was a big area, but a sort of largely uninhabited area. Didn't produce a lot of income for the cathedral. And at the start of the 19th century, the cathedral had the opportunity to sell off the manor, and they did that under the Redemption of Land Tax Act, which basically meant that for a one-off payment of tax, big landowners could then do away with tax in future years. And I think the cathedral decided that by disposing of the manor of Dawlish, maybe others, I'm not sure, but by disposing of the manor of Dawlish, they could then pay off tax on other lands that they owned. So it came to be that in 1802, the manor of Dawlish was sold off, and it was bought by well, three gentlemen over the next few years. There was John Inglet Fortescue, who had the main interest in it in 1802. Then there was Richard Eales, who was a wealthy landowner here, and John Eady Manning, who came on the scene a little bit later. Now, Fortescue had money troubles, and he sold most of the manor that he had bought on to John Eady Manning. Now, the auction actually took place at the Atmospheric Railway in Starcross. I think possibly because the church authorities were expecting the Earl of Devon to buy the manor himself, the manor of Dawlish. But in actual fact, he was short of money himself, because he was he enjoyed himself, as most Georgian, wealthy Georgians did, and he was in quite some debt himself, so wasn't able to buy the manor himself, which is probably quite a good job, because once John Eady Manning had got his hands on it, he set about improving it. And if you can imagine standing on the bandstand now, well, you wouldn't have been able to in 1802, because that was a marshy inlet, tidal inlet as well, up as far as Brooklands. And in high tides, or with high tides, then all the land there did actually flood, and the brook meandered down the lawn. Not that there was a lawn there, but down the marshy strip. It was known as Tunnicliffe Waste, and it was rather a smelly, marshy, nettly place, I would imagine, with mosquitoes and all sorts. And the locals who lived a little bit further upstream around the church area did dispose of all their unwanted bits and pieces into the brook, and that all came downstream and made it rather an unpleasant place to be. Now, John Eady Manning thought, well, this isn't what is going to attract people to Dawlish. I need to tidy this up a bit. So he straightened the brook, which sounds easy but wasn't. But if you buy my second book, you will learn how he did it. There's a nice little story in there about him straightening the brook. He raised the level of what was the marsh by about a metre or a yard in his day, I think 3 feet. And he used waste from Queen Street and Strand Hill, which were really only tracks at that time, but he built up the land so that the flooding couldn't get in, even in the worst storms, he thought. So he straightened the brook. It was then called the canal, because if you do stand by the brook and look up and down, it looks more like a canal than a stream, because it's all wall either side, and it's got nice little waterfalls and so forth. And he'd finished this by about 1807. Now, within 3 years, a tremendous storm hit the town one November, had high tides coming in. We had torrential rain for days up on Holden. And when the sea met the water coming down off the moor, then the land or the lawn flooded again. That washed away all the lawn that he had built up, and it washed away houses, it washed away cattle and all sorts. So I don't think any lives were lost. But even so, it made a heck of a mess of the middle of the town. Now, he, to be fair, he did decide to rebuild this, and it cost him £11,000 then, about £1 million in today's money, to redo the work. At the same time, he had got married just a few years before. He's only in his early 20s at this stage. He had got married. He had his first child, I think, in 1807. He then started building the manor house as well, which was going to be his family home. And basically, he ran out of money, and or was running out of money. And in actual fact, within a few years, he was almost declared bankrupt, and decided to go abroad for a few years to try and recover some of his fortune. But in the meantime, he had sorted out the Brook, the lawn area, created pleasure gardens, and he also started creating the Strand more or less as we know it, not with shop fronts, but as rather nice townhouses and villas. And if you stand on the bandstand again and look at the Strand, you can see above the or behind the facades of the shops, the shop windows, you can see the lovely architecture of the old houses, villas that he created. And he created those rather in front of the lowly cottages that have been there pretty much since Tudor times. Those old fishing cottages all the way down. And if you go through most of the shops that are down the Strand now, you will find the remains of old cottages in behind. So the building line was actually further back, because I think the Brook, when it did flood, it flooded quite a way to the sides as well. And that's why there's so much room between the Strand and Brunswick Place, because it did meander all the way down through. So there, well, we set the scene a little bit with John Eady Manning. He ended up actually having spent some time in Europe and then come back to Britain. He had forgotten all about Dawlish, I think, by that stage, and he emigrated to Australia, and he made another fortune down there, lost it all again, and came back to England before he died. And he lived a long life. He died in, I think, about 1870, something like that. But his influence on Dawlish, I think, was quite important, because having sorted out the lawn area and started or getting people interested in the holiday trade, they weren't called holidays, they were a bit more than holidays. Georgians didn't come down here for a week or two. They came down for the season, because it would take, say, from London, it would take about 5 days to get to Dawlish, and the same from Birmingham, wherever anybody wanted to come from. It took days either by stagecoach or by private coach to Exeter, and then smaller coach onto Dawlish. But he set the scene, and in 1810, the road started improving, and a stagecoach service did come to Dawlish. In 1800, just missed that out, the London Hotel, which was at the bottom of the Strand, where the Co-op and Corals are now. That was a big hotel, elegant Georgian hotel, built in 1800, and that was the first place really that Georgians could actually come and stay and be waited on hand and foot. Rather nice cots were built around the seafront. When I say cots, they were sort of big townhouses up around Plantation Terrace. There's some rather nice detached houses. If you think of Brookdale at the top of Brunswick Place, the big pink thatched house, that's the sort of style of house that the Georgians wanted to stay in or to live in if they were going to buy a property in this area. And of course, the locals, the peasants, as the Georgians would probably have referred to them, who were living in the Strand cottages at this time, or up until this time, John Eady Manning sort of built cottages for them at the back of the town, so they were relegated to the back of the town. And so if you think of and Brook Street, Albert Street, and Regent Street, King Street, Princess Street, they all betray their origins from the sort of George III and George IV names. So this was all happening. It was a bit of moving the poor local people back away from the seafront, which is where the Georgians, the wealthy Georgians, wanted to come and stay, and they didn't want to be rubbing shoulders with the hoi polloi, the likes of you and me. Are we allowed to say you hoi polloi now? I suppose we are, really. So anyway, the stagecoach, instead of people coming by private coach and maybe sort of a family of 3, 4, 5 or whatever that could get in the coach, now people could come and stay, and a stagecoach would bring 10, 12, possibly even 14 people down. And the journey time, as I say, was between 4 and 5 days to get from London down to Dawlish. In the 1820s, the Turnpike Trust started to improve roads in the area, and that got rid of all the pothole rutted and dreadful roads that had the pitted, of course, which slowed the coaches down. They also managed to get rid of the highwaymen as well, so the journeys were rather more pleasant, and that reduced the journey time to sort of just under 4 days to get, say, from London. Also, at the start of the 19th century, we had got to remember that there were no utilities as such. There was no mains electricity, there was no mains water, no mains gas, no mains drainage. So as well as the locals up by the church chucking all their detritus into the Brook, there were no facilities in these new houses that the Georgians would make their life much easier. So we had public reading rooms that were built down by Sea Breeze, where it is now down by the station. That was public reading rooms and assembly rooms there, where the Georgians could go and read the newspapers at the time, get away from their ladies, and play the old game of billiards or whatever. Public baths were built down on the on Marine Parade, or the Strand as it was called then, and public baths were very important because there was no sanitation in the houses. So Dawlish was definitely improving, but it was a slow business. There was much more employment here. So whereas most of the locals have been employed in agriculture and fishing, then of course all these holiday makers, as they were, the Georgians who resorted here, they needed looking after. They needed smiths, smithies for the horses. You needed builders, roofers, carpenters, all sorts for building the new properties that were springing up, the rather new high-class cots and townhouses. Servants and domestic staff were also needed as well. And of course, the agricultural revolution was giving way to the industrial revolution as well. So people were moving from the countryside into the towns, and it was this time really that Dawlish changed from a village into a town. And between 1800, when the population was just over 1,000, up until 1840, when 1841, when the next census was, the population had gone up to over 4,000 at that stage. So it quadrupled in size. And just to put that into sort of context, the population has more than quadrupled again. We're up to sort of 16, going on 17,000 now, I think, and that's over the last 150, 160 years. So we're up to the late 1830s now, and although the population hadn't hugely increased in sort of overall terms, a lot more visitors were coming, and there were more and more amenities for them. But it was at this stage really that Isambard Kingdom Brunel, the foremost engineer of the time, had set his sights on constructing a railway from London to Plymouth, going via Bristol and then Exeter and then Plymouth and then down on into Cornwall. And in the 1830s, mid-1830s, the railway line started from London, reached cut. No, I can't cut. We reached, hang on, we got from London to Bristol by 1838. Bristol to Exeter by 1841. So he didn't hang around. It's, it's Network Rail have taken a couple of years so far to do the seawall. I think, is that about right, Neil?
Absolutely, yeah.
Something like that. And yet within 3 years he had built from London to Bristol, and then from Bristol to Exeter, and from Exeter he was then setting his sights on Plymouth. But there were rival bids. There was a choice of two routes going on. They either had the route down the coast, which is what we ended up with, or there was a route which would be going north, round the north of Dartmoor, up to Crediton, or Curtin as they call it up there, over to Oakhampton, down through Tavistock, and then down Plymouth that way. But there were pluses and minuses on both sides. The minuses on the northern route, which wasn't chosen, were the steep hills. Obviously, you've got the granite of Dartmoor, so that would have been a lot of engineering work with the steep hills and creating tunnels and viaducts and all the rest of it. Then you've got the lack of population, because although these towns were there, the population was much more spread, and this is why I think Brunel favoured the coastal route, was because he could then, from Exeter, it would then take in sort of Kenton, Starcross, Dawlish, Teignmouth, Newton Abbot, then on down to Torquay, a little branch off to Paynton, and then sort of Totnes and all the way down to Plymouth and beyond. So, and also it was coastal as well. So I think he recognised the fact that a coastal route would attract much more business than an inland route. And so it turned out, but he had a lot of opposition over that, for instance, the Powdram, the Earl of Devon, really didn't want the Iron Horse down at the bottom of his land, sort of cutting off his view of the estuary. In Teignmouth, Admiral Pellew, who owned Bitton House, certainly didn't want the railway at the bottom of his garden, just on the Tean estuary. And in Dawlish itself, the fishermen in Dawlish certainly didn't want a railway going along the seafront, cutting the beach off from the town, and meaning that they couldn't moor their boats on Boat Cove or lay out their nets to dry on the sands, or that the bathing machines wouldn't be able to get down onto the beach to preserve the modesty of the ladies. But he overcame all this. Oh, and the owners in Marine Parade, it was called Marine Parade by that time, they weren't at all keen, because back when they were built, the houses on Marine Parade opened straight onto the beach, which couldn't have been too much fun during stormy weather, but they did have their sitting rooms on the first floor and their bedrooms on the second floor, and they had their staff on the ground floor. So if it was flooded, then it was the staff who were getting wet rather than the actual owners of the house. But he had to buy a number of the houses along Marine Parade because the owners wanted compensation, as they would do, and he actually used the biggest house, Great Cliff, as his offices whilst the line was being built. So, having overcome all these problems, by 1843, he was ready to start building, and he had about 2,000 workers, navvies, drawn locally, but also from different parts of the country. They would come and work for him. So that's 2,000 people. That's a lot of people. And when you think the population of Dawlish at that time was probably about I was getting on for 4,000, I was saying, there's a 50% increase in the population for a couple of years or so. And that didn't go down too well with the locals, because when the navvies were paid on a Friday night, they spent their money in the pubs, but they also set their sights on the local women as well. So I think there was a lot of antipathy between the locals and the navvies, who were not welcome at the time. Anyway, on Bank Holiday Monday, May 1846, the railway was ready to open, and great fanfare. The Earl of Devon turned out to Starcross, and all the locals turned out in Dawlish, And if you want to know how it went on, there's another story in my book.
Nice plug.
A nice book, yeah, all about the day the railway opened. So it's worth reading because it's quite amusing. So it was a great fanfare, and the railway was open. Now this had quite an effect, and this is what I'm coming on to, is what did Brunel ever do for Dawlish? Well, somebody put on Facebook today, and I mentioned no names because I can't remember the name, was, oh yes, he was the one who cut off the town from the sea. And that's all he did for Dawlish. And I was ready to go into a diatribe about everything he'd done for Dawlish. And I thought, no, if you think what you think, I'm not going to change your mind. So I will go through a few of the things which I think Isambard Kingdom Brunel did do for Dawlish, because the Great Western Railway wasn't his first enterprise, really. He and his father had built, I think it was the Dartford Tunnel, or one, no, not one of the tunnels under the Thames, and also the railway between London and Bristol. You had the box tunnel, you had cuttings, you had embankments, you had all sorts, and he got really heavily involved all the way through. Some of his drawings are absolutely marvelous. But 1846 was the year it opened. The following year, 1847, the Dawlish Gas and Coke Company started. Now, the immediate effect really on was several effects really, and the Dawlish Gas and Coke Company was one of them. But I'll start with the actual getting to and from Dawlish, because instead of people arriving in Dawlish by stagecoach, 10 or a dozen at a time, suddenly you had trains. I'm not going to talk too much about the atmospheric railway because it's difficult to explain how it worked. It didn't last very long, it didn't work very well, and it was a bit of a disaster. But if you want to look it up, you can do, but it would take another half hour to talk about that. But the railway was a great success, and once the steam had got going, all sorts of things happened. So the first thing was, instead of people arriving 10 or a dozen at a time, you could fit 100 people on a train. So the journey time, remember I was saying, was best part of 4 days to get from London to Dawlish. Well, now it was about 5 hours. Suddenly, Dawlish was accessible. So instead of 4 days to come on holiday or to resort, you could actually come in just a few hours, and that meant you didn't need to have to stay for the season. You could just come and visit for a couple of weeks or so. As well as people, you could have freight being hauled. And whereas the main method of construction of all the local cottages up until the time the railway came was cob and thatch, suddenly you had bricks, stone, slates, coal was coming as well. So you could bring heavy materials in bulk, and that meant that cob buildings sort of died out during the second half of the 19th century. And if you look around Dawlish at the brick houses that we've got, particularly the brick terraces such as Iddesleigh Terrace, Brookdale Terrace, which underneath the rendering is brick. Then you go down to Sealawn Terrace, San Remo Terrace, Riviera Terrace, and other places I'm sure you can think of, where brick was the main method of construction. And one of the beauties of brick was that it was easier to build, but also it meant that you could build higher. And a lot of the land in the centre of Dawlish had been used up by these new buildings that were used by the Georgians. So they started spreading out a little bit from the actual town centre, which is why Iddesleigh Terrace and Riviera Terrace and that sort of place started to spring up. But it meant that you could build higher. Instead of cob going up 2 stories and then having lath and plaster for a 3rd story maybe, you could now build up 4 stories in brick. So you didn't need so much land to build a decent sized house, which is why the townhouses became so popular, because when people were resorting, if they were had second homes here or were staying in houses, they didn't need big gardens, so the houses could be built much more closely. So there we go. We've got this coming in of people and also of freight, but you also had materials going out. So we had fish and flowers. We've got nurseries all the way around Dawlish. Some of them still exist, but there were many more back in Victorian and beyond times. So going up to London, you could pop your fish or your vegetables or your flowers on the train in the morning, and they could be up in London by lunchtime. So we had a two-way traffic really of comings and goings. Now I'm just going to look at my watch because my wife said don't go on too much.
She knows you.
Yeah. She said, are you doing the 3/4 hour or the 3 hour? So I'll leave it to the 3/4 of an hour. So there we so I've done that page as well. So there we are. And I started off by saying the Dawlish Gas and Coke Co. in 1847. Well, that meant that within a few years, houses could be heated with coke or coal more easily, because up until then it was mainly wood that was used, but also gas was piped. So you had the bigger houses were piped, so suddenly you had gas lighting, gas heating and gas cooking in the bigger houses. So that was a great improvement. Not only with gas and coke, and I'll come on to the other utilities soon, but in 1850, for instance, so just 3 years later, within 4 years of the railway opening, you had this increasing population, and the parish church, St Gregory's Parish Church, turned out it wasn't actually big enough to house everybody who wanted to go to church, because everybody did go to church. So you had St Mark's Chapel of Ease, or St Mark's Church, built on Brunswick Place. That was 1850. And that's a limestone church, or was. It's gone again now. It went in the 1970s. Another 10 years later, you had the Methodist Chapel that was built further up Brunswick Place, just beyond the finest pub in Dawlish, the Brunswick Arms. Sorry. So you had St Mark's. Another 10 years, you had Dawlish Congregational Church, which is now the Strand Centre. The church with the steeple. So you had the big churches that were appearing as well, and the public reading rooms, they disappeared, because once the people had got lighting in their own homes, they didn't need to go out to places that had their own lighting, so they didn't need the reading rooms. So for a time it was assembly rooms, then it was demolished, and that became a hotel, the Royal Hotel. At the same time, all around between 1850 and 1860, you had a number of other hotels that were built. You had the Richmond Hotel, you had a Temperance Hotel, you had the Grand Hotel, there was a commercial, there was an Albert, there was a York Hotel. A few years later, there was the Blenheim Hotel, which is still there. And once the town centre was filled up, then you started moving out a bit, and you had places like the Charlton House Hotel and the Rockstone Hotel. So more and more people wanted to come and stay, and they were all sort of quite high quality places, because the average population didn't have paid holiday at the time. Right the way through the 19th century, your average worker, although he got bank holidays off, didn't have a week's paid holiday, and that didn't come in until the beginning of the 20th century. So Dawlish was quite upmarket and attracted the right sort of clientele, if you like. And the more hotels that were built, then the more employment there was. So that attracted the lower class people as well. So Dawlish expanded for that as well. So you had the likes of Luscombe Terrace and Hatcher Street being built, brick houses as well. But we noticed that everything was still really quite clustered around the town centre. And because people found it easier to come and go, then it wasn't just lodging rooms and hotels and apartments that these visitors wanted, but they wanted to settle as well. So you had the likes of Barton Villas, big houses on Barton Villas, Brookdale Terrace, for instance, that was towards the end of the 19th century, and you had Oak Park Villas. So there's still big places that were being built right the way through into the beginning of the 20th century, up until the start of the First World War. And of course, that's when the social order changed. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because we've got to 1870 with the Congregational Church, and bear in mind that the St Mark's Chapel of Ease, or St Mark's Church, and the Congregational Church were both built on the site of pubs, because they were public houses, and they were public houses in the area where the wealthier people lived. And it was these pubs that started to close down, because once being in your own home became more comfortable through heating and lighting, then you didn't need to go out to these public houses to socialise so much. You could socialise within your own homes, a bit like we're doing at the moment in lockdown, but without the actual socialising bit. We're just drinking at home. Zoom, yes, and things like this. Now, 1868. Of course, all the Georgians or the Victorians that were coming there were quite wealthy, and they wanted experiences. So boating became very popular, and with boating there were accidents. So there was a new Coast Guard station that was built in 1868 down on the cliff side near Riviera Terrace, along there, just to the right of Exeter Road. And I think there was about 8 houses, along with the manager's house, for all the Coast Guards that were there. During the 1870s, mains, electricity, water and drainage were put in the bigger houses. So there was improved services there. Private schools proliferated. There was a council school in 1874. Dawlish had its own bank, local newspapers, and there were national banks by the end of the century. So the second half of the 19th century really was a time when Dawlish changed from being sort of quite a sleepy little village into quite a vibrant town, which did attract the rich and famous. Well, not so much famous, but the rich. So we've done that. So the population, blah, 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 blah. Oh, so we'll then sort of go on to the beginning of the 20th century, because nowadays we tend to think of Dawlish as being a lovely, quiet place for people to come and watch the ducks and the black swans and so forth, and sit on the beach. But of course, the better beach, or the best beach in the area, I would say, is Dawlish Warren. But at the beginning of the 20th century, Dawlish Warren was just a warren. It wasn't called Dawlish Warren, it was a warren, and it was a bleak place where there had been smuggling, where there were sultans. So salt was made at Dawlish Warren. Though it was a warren, so there were rabbits there, so there were poachers there, but there was nothing in the way of facilities. And it wasn't until 1905 that Great Western Railway, which it had become by then, decided to build a station there. They built Warren Halt, which was just a platform, but people had started driving by that stage, and cycling, and people used to come down from Exeter to the Warren, as it was called, and enjoy sitting on the beach. So there was a great demand from local people actually to build a station there. So it wasn't where the station is now. As you go under the tunnel on Beach Way to get to the beach, it was just to the right of there, where the Brunel holiday coaches are. And if you haven't tried them, they're wonderful. So
indeed they are. I have stayed there twice.
Have you?
They are phenomenal, yes.
I hope you had a young lady with you. Anyway, you can cut that bit later. So the 1905 Warren Halt opened, and that brought many people to the Warren. The only thing really that had been happening at the Warren, apart from the poachers and the smugglers, was the golf course. And the golf course, the links course, was opened in 1892 as somewhere for the wealthy Victorians either to come down from Exeter, or those who were staying in Dawlish to play around there. And such was the popularity of Dawlish Warren between or after 1905 that the Warren Halt wasn't big enough, so they actually had to build a longer platform, which they couldn't do to the right because of the cliffs. So they built to the left. And that's when the name Dawlish Warren started. And that was really, this was 1912, this was the start of Dawlish Warren as a sought after place to come. And of course, just after that was the First World War. And as I was saying earlier, the social order started to change during and after the war. And the wealthier people started, well, the whole social order changed. You know how it changed. You've only got to watch Downton Abbey to see what happened after the war. And also from 1907 or 1909, I think this was when paid holidays became the norm, only a week's holiday for the workers. But after the First World War, this was when the golden age of the railway started, and for the Warren anyway. And you had the factories all closed in the Midlands or 1 week, and in Scotland another week, and in the Northeast another week, and all the workers would get onto the trains and descend on places like Weston-super-Mare or Exmouth or Dawlish, and particularly Dawlish Warren. And this was when it really took off as a centre. Now, none of this really would have happened without Brunel, because I sometimes try to imagine what would have happened to Dawlish if the railway line had gone north and over North Dartmoor. But it's difficult. There would have been a branch line at some stage, I think, or maybe they would have seen sense and thought, no, with those storms, we're never going to build along the coast, because it has been for years the most expensive section of line that could have been chosen or in the country, and this continues to be so. And the fact that we've had the Wave Walker here, and that's just departing now, is testament to the fact that it's a very expensive piece of line, but is vital to the well-being of the whole of the West Country. Because if you can't go by train then down into towards Plymouth and into Cornwall, then you haven't got any options really apart from on the road. So it is a vital link down on the railway. I've done about so much time. I've got a few other things I do want to say, but on the other hand, I think it's time maybe we ought to open up to see if anybody has any questions to ask at all.
We have some questions coming, David.
Yeah.
Let's drink over there if you'd like.
Oh yes, I'll have a quick slurp. Thank you.
Coffee. Right, so we have what have we got? So we got, was the Strandhill the first road into Dawlish via Exeter? That's from Richard Bird.
Thank you, Richard. Evening to you. If you've read my book, which hopefully you have by now, I think an answer. But Strandhill, I think, was the second, because I've always heard that Stockton Hill was the first, because you've got to realise that back in Anglo-Saxon times, they built their settlement up round by the church. The church wasn't there then, but the settlement started there for various reasons. It was the nearest place to the sea where you could actually cross the river. You could ford the river easily, which is why, as I said earlier, it was known as Dawlish Ford. Well, there was a ford across the river, and that made it easier. You were out of sight of the coast, because pirates used to go up and down the coast. The Vikings did, and barbarians and all sorts. And up by the church, you were away from all that. Various other reasons, but yes, if the population was there, then they could not easily go up towards Exeter by going along Exeter Road as we know it now. So they would have gone up over Stockton Hill to avoid Shutterton Brook, because as I mentioned earlier, the Shutterton area, which is all warehousing and industrial now, was all marshy and a tidal inlet. And if you look at some of the older buildings out at Shutterton, they are sinking into the mud, because after it was after they reclaimed the land, it became the municipal tip as well. So it's very unstable land out there. But it's called Stockton Hill because the stock that were driven into town, and there were weekly markets in the town, or in the village as it was, and they would come in from the likes of Shutterton, Farm, Seckmit, and various other farms that are out there. They would use Stockton Hill, so they would come in along Seckmerton Lane, up Gatehouse Hill, because there was Gatehouse Farm as well, don't forget, up there, and then down Stockton Hill the other side. And Strand Hill came a bit later because when the hamlet known as Strand started to pop up, then rather than get up or go up and use Stockton Hill, which was a longer way round, then Strand Hill was devised, and they met at the top over the hill up near Gatehouse. So yeah, you're right. So Strand Hill was an important way, and I don't think the stagecoach would ever have gone up that way because it would have been too heavy. But certainly it was used for stock as well. But for anybody really going up towards Exeter from the Strand area, from the lower part, then they would use Strand Hill.
Well, that's I remember Stockton Hill is, I believe, a 1 in 4 for those that aren't local.
Yeah.
And you know, I used to live at the top of there at Eastcliff, and walking up there after a few pints was pretty difficult. And if you know, these are taking goods and stuff up and down, that's quite incredible.
Yeah, my wife actually, you say that because, but we do still live over at Gatehouse, and my wife used to push a pram to Lanherne, took the older one to Lanherne school with the younger one in the pram, and she used to do that twice a day,
Blimey.
up and down. Yeah. She was very fair.
Absolutely. Right, another question from one of our supporters, actually, Sarah. Hi, Sarah Goodliff. We have, when was Dawlish Railway Station first opened?
Aha. Well, Dawlish Railway Station actually opened on the day that the railway opened, and I was there in the story in my book.
Yes.
I was actually there on the station and had a chat with Brunel. But yes, the what we have there now isn't the original station. The original station was wooden, and it was open to the sea. So whoever designed it, I don't know whether it was Brunel, but it wasn't his greatest achievement, built it so that it was quite big, and it was on stanchions. It was all wooden, but it was open. And if anybody has stood on the railway station when the sea's crashing over, even or with the buildings that we've got there now, you know, you can still get the spray. But when that was open sided to the sea, it must have been pretty horrendous. But that opened in 1846. It actually burnt down in about 1873. And was replaced by 1875 with the station that we've got now. And after it had burnt down 1873, they moved the station for a time to Sea Lawn, the big house which has disappeared now, but it was a big thatched house down where Sea Lawn Terrace is now. And a Midlands industrialist, when he retired, wanted to retire to a quiet place by the sea. So he built himself Sea Lawn, which is about, well, it opened onto the beach in actual fact down at Sea Lawn. And then when Brunel built the railway came within 6 foot of his windows. So he wasn't best pleased, and the railway bought it from him in the end, and they used it as a temporary station whilst the old station was being rebuilt.
Brilliant, thank you. And we have one more, I think, time for one more question. This is from our friend, I believe, Ian Davis. We know that Brunel's atmospheric railway ran down here, but was it always linked to the main line, or was it opened up to include the main line after it didn't work?
That's a very good question.
Thanks, Ian.
I'll remember this on Facebook, Ian. You watch out, pal. I'll get you.
I think he might have chosen this specifically to put you on.
I think he
spot.
He's not an easy person to like, I'll tell you. I think, I don't know because I haven't read that much up on it, but I believe that all passengers actually had to change trains to go from the from steam service to the atmospheric service, because they didn't run on the same lines immediately, because obviously as far as I know, the atmospheric, well, it started at London. You had atmospheric pumping stations at St David's, St Thomas, Exminster, Starcross, Dawlish, Teignmouth, somewhere between, wasn't one in Teignmouth? I think there wasn't one in Teignmouth, and then somewhere at Lower Weir Farm, I think, then Newton Abbot. And so yes, it was awkward. It was never, I think it was always destined to fail, the atmospheric railway, because it was not it didn't gel well with the rest of the railway network, but also locally, of course, you had the problems with the pistons and the compression and so forth, because the pipes, I'll say a little bit about the atmospheric because it is important. There were pipes that were laid all the way along beside the route or down the middle of the line, and the pumping stations were acted as great pistons really to drive air down through the pipes, which drove the engines, or locomotives as they were called, up to about 70 miles an hour. I think that was the world record at that time, but I think they traveled usually at 30 to 40 miles an hour. But the sea air, the links between the pipes that sealed them were made of leather, and the sea air and the rats combined meant that there were always leaks going on, so there was never enough pumping going on. Sounds bad, isn't it? to keep the trains running properly. And that's not a very good explanation, Ian, I'm sorry, but I'll talk to you over a pint in the pub again.
When we can.
When we can.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think we should run that up. That's a good hour's talk. Thank you so much, David. I think if you want to point out, or we'll point out as well, Helping Dawlish, you are doing some historic videos on there as well, I believe. Is that correct?
I am at the moment, yes. Angie Weatherhead and I have been doing little pieces around Dawlish on various parts of Dawlish history, which I'm doing live to camera, and then they're sort of uploaded onto Facebook and various places. And we've done a few so far. We've got a few more planned. Angie's been very busy with her vaccination work. I've been busy actually doing bits and pieces for this and other things, but we will be getting together to do one or two more about different aspects of the history.
Absolutely. So if you follow the Facebook page Helping Dawlish, that would be great, because you'll see David's videos. Obviously, we have our weekly blog posts go out on a Sunday that David kindly does for us. And if you really want to know more, buy his books. You can get them on our website, and if you buy one of each, you get a brilliant discount.
You do? Well, they're actually £10 each, or 2 for 16, and my signature is free. It's cheap. It's cheaper than cheap,
and the money goes to local charities as well.
It does indeed. Yeah. Yes, I don't make a penny out of this.
So it goes to our museum, and what your
we've got AIMS. We've got Snooky Trust. Oh,
Snooky Trust.
Yes. Kaz Steffens as well. Now, for Snooky Trust names, I haven't actually covered my costs yet to give them any money, but please, if you fancy, I'll tell you, the book I'm doing for Snooky Trust names is called Eavesdropper, and it's 15 short stories about the past in Dawlish, where I sort of managed to go back in time by devious means, and I see how things are happening in Dawlish. So I've got a couple of adventures with Brunel. I've got one with about Luscombe Castle. I've got another with Iron Age people. I've got one with Anglo-Saxons, and I've got a couple with the fishermen in Tudor times. I've even got the Second World War. I've got the Home Guard as well. So all sorts of tales about different parts of Dawlish history. Some of it's fact, some of it's fiction, but it's all good fun.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you again to UK Community Network and Helping Dawlish. We hope you've enjoyed this live stream. Good night.
Good night.